All right, so this is going to be the reading of John Locke. This is chapter 27 from the Essay Concerning Human Understanding. So this was originally published in 1694, and the title of the chapter is Of Identity and Diversity. Section 1, wherein identity consists. Another occasion the mind often takes of comparing is the very being of things. When considering anything as existing at any determined time and place, we compare it with itself existing at another time, and thereon form the ideas of identity and diversity. When we see anything to be in any place, in any instant of time, we are sure, be it what it will, that it is that very thing and not another, which is, or which at the same time exists in another place, how like and undistinguishable soever it may be in all other respects. And in this consists identity, when the ideas it is attributed to vary not at all from what they were that moment wherein we consider their former existence, and to which we compare the present. For we never finding nor conceiving it possible that two things of the same kind should exist in the same place at the same time, we rightly conclude that whatever exists anywhere at any time excludes all of the same kind and is there itself alone. When, therefore, we demand whether anything be the same or no, it refers always to something that existed such a time in such a place, which it was certain at that instant was the same thing with itself and no other. From whence it follows that one thing cannot have two beginnings of existence, nor two things one beginning, it being impossible for two things of the same kind to be or exist in the same instant, in the very same place, or one and the same thing in different places at the same instant. That, therefore, that had one beginning is the same thing, and that which had a different beginning in time and place is not the same, but diverse. So identity and diversity. That which had made the difficulty about this relation has been the little care and attention used in having precise notions of the thing to which it is attributed. Section 2, identity of substances. We have the ideas of but three sorts of substances. 1, God. 2, finite intelligences. 3, bodies. First, God is without beginning, eternal, unalterable, and everywhere. Therefore, concerning his identity, there can be no doubt. And that's the last he talks about it. Secondly, finite spirits, having had each its determinate time and place of beginning to exist, the relation to that time and place will always determine to each of them its identity as long as it exists. Thirdly, the same will hold of every particle of matter, to which no addition or subtraction of matter being made, it is the same. So the second one is finite intelligences, so things that can think, and then just material bodies is the third. 4, though these three sorts of substances, as we term them, do not exclude one another out of the same place, yet we cannot conceive but that they must necessarily, each of them, exclude any of the same kind out of the same place. Or else the notions and names of identity and diversity would be in vain, and there could be no such distinction of substances or anything else one from another. For example, could two bodies be in the same place at the same time, then those two parcels of matter must be one and the same. Take them great or little. Nay, all bodies must be one and the same. For by the same reason that two particles of matter would be in the same place, all bodies would be in the same place, which, when it can be supposed, take away the distinction of identity and diversity of one and more, and renders it ridiculous. But it being a contradiction that two or more should be one, identity and diversity are relations and ways of comparing well founded and of use to the understanding. All right, identity of modes. This is still in section 2. All other things being but modes or relations ultimately terminated in substances, the identity and diversity of each particular existence of them will be by the same way determined. Only as to things whose existence is in succession, such as are the actions of finite beings, like motion and thought, both of which consist in a continued train of succession. Concerning their diversity, there can be no question, because each perishing the moment it begins, they cannot exist in different times or in different places, as permanent beings can at different times exist in different places. So a process or moving, the movement itself is different at every moment, so there's no identity of movement through time. Each part thereof having a different beginning of existence. All right, section 3, Principium Individuationis. From what has been said, it is easy to discover what is so much inquired after, the Principium Individuationis, or the principle of individuation. And that is, it is plain, is existence itself, which determines a being of any sort to a particular time and place, incommunicable to two beings of the same kind. This, though it seems easier to conceive in simple substances or modes, yet when reflected on, is not more difficult in compound ones, if care be taken to what it is applying to. For example, let us suppose an atom, so a continued body under one immutable superficies, existing in a determined time and place. It is evident that, considered in any instant of its existence, it is in that instant the same with itself. For, being at that instant what it is, and nothing else, it is the same, and so must continue as long as its existence is continued. For so long it will be the same and no other. In like manner, if two or more atoms be joined together into the same mass, every one of those atoms will be the same by the foregoing rule. And whilst they exist united together, the mass, consisting of the same atoms, must be the same mass or the same body, let the parts be ever so differently jumbled. So if there's just the two atoms, then no matter how you put them together, it's still the same mass. But if one of these atoms be taken away, or a new one added, it is no longer the same mass or the same body. In the state of living creatures, their identity depends not on a mass of the same particles, but on something else. For in them, the variation of great parcels of matter alters not the identity. An oak growing from a plant to a great tree, and then lopped, is still the same oak, and a colt grown up to a horse, sometimes fat, sometimes lean, is all the while the same horse, though in both these cases there may be a manifest change in the parts, so that truly they are not either of them the same masses of matter, though they be truly one of them the same oak and the other the same horse. The reason whereof is that in these two cases, a mass of matter and a living body, identity is not applied to the same thing. So what it is to be the identical mass of matter and the identical living body are different. Section 4, Identity of vegetables. We must therefore consider wherein an oak differs from a mass of matter, and it seems to me to be in this, that the one is only the cohesion of particles of matter anyhow united, the other a disposition of them as constitutes the parts of an oak, and such an organization of those parts as is fit to receive and distribute nourishment, so as to continue and frame the wood, bark, leaves, etc. of an oak, in which consists the vegetable life. So then you can't just jumble the parts. However, they have to be in the right kind of order to continue distributing nourishment to the different parts of the oak. That being then one plant which has such an organization of parts in one coherent body, partaking of one common life, it continues to be the same plant as long as it partakes of the same life, though that life be communicated to new particles of matter, vitally united to the living plant, in a like manner, continued organization conformable to that of the plants. So as the oak grows, then more matter comes in and now becomes alive in the sense of it's vitally united to the oak tree, but it's still continuing the life of the oak. For this organization being at any one instant in any one collection of matter is in that particular concrete distinguished from all others, and is that individual life, which existing constantly from that moment, both forwards and backwards, in the same continuity of insensibly succeeding parts united to the living body of the plant, it has that identity which makes the same plant, and all the parts of it, parts of the same plant, during all the time that they exist united in that continued organization, which is fit to convey the common life to all the parts so united. Section 5, Identity of animals. The case is not so much different in brutes, but that anyone may hence see what makes an animal and continues the same. something we have like this in machines and may serve to illustrate it. For example, what is a watch? It is plain, it is nothing but a fit organization or construction of parts to a certain end, which, when a sufficient force is added to it, it is capable to attain. If we would suppose this machine one continued body, all whose organized parts were repaired, increased, or diminished by a constant addition or separation of insensible parts, with one common life, we should have something very much like the body of an animal. With this difference, so the difference between a watch and an animal, that in an animal, the fitness of the organization and the motion wherein life consists begin together, the motion coming from within. But in machines, the force coming sensibly from without or on the outside, often away when the organ is in order and well fitted to receive it. 6, the identity of man. And it's going to be difficult to do my usual thing where I make this more gender neutral. So by man here, he's specifically picking out humans. So he's not picking out any particular gender. So he's using it as a way to refer to humans, but not to persons. So we're going to use the term human sometimes for man or man and human, but it's not interchangeable with person in this regard. All right, chapter 6, the identity of man. Excuse me, section 6. This also shows wherein the identity of the same man consists, viz., in nothing but a participation of the same continued life by constantly fleeting particles of matter in succession vitally united to the same organized body. So this is what makes you the same human over time. He that shall place the identity of man in anything else, but like that of other animals, in one fitly organized body, taken in any one instant, and from these continued, under one organization of life and several successively fleeting particles of matter united to it, will find it hard to make of an embryo, one of years, mad and sober, the same man by any supposition, that would not make it possible for Seth, Ismail, Socrates, Pilate, St. Austin, I think Augustine, and Caesar Borgia to be the same man. For if the identity of soul alone makes the same man or human, and there be nothing in the nature of matter why the same individual spirit may not be united to different bodies, it will be possible that those men living in different ages and of different tempers may have been the same man, which way of speaking must be from a very strange use of the word man applied to an idea, out of which body and shape are excluded. So part of what he's trying to say here is that there is something to being the same person that is different from being the same human, where even though there's a fleeting, changing mass of particles, there's something continuous about the actual vitally organized parts of the human itself. And that's something that he wants to sort of pull out and talk about separately. And and that way of speaking would agree yet worse with the notions of those philosophers who allow of transmigration. So think of the Plato reading earlier in the series. And are of opinion that the souls of humans may, for their miscarriages, be detruded into the bodies of beasts as fit habitations, with organs suited to the satisfaction of their brutal inclinations. But yet I think nobody, could he be sure that the soul of Heliogabalus were in one of his hogs, would yet say that hog were human or Heliogabalus. Okay, section 7, identity suited to the idea. It is not, therefore, unity of substance that comprehends all sorts of identity, or will determine it in every case. But to conceive and judge of it aright, we must consider what idea the word it is applied to stands for, it being one thing to be the same substance, another the same human, and a third the same person, if person, human, and substance are 3 names standing for 3 different ideas. For such as is the idea belonging to that name, such must be the identity, which, if it had been a little more carefully attended to, would possibly have prevented a great deal of confusion. This is him throwing shade on other philosophers. They always do. Well, if everyone had been more careful, then they wouldn't have made this mistake. Yeah, prevented a great deal of that confusion, which often occurs about this matter, with no small seeming difficulties, especially concerning personal identity, which therefore we shall in the next place a little consider. Section 8, same human. An animal is living organized body. And consequently, the same animal, as we have observed, is the same continued life communicated to different particles of matter as they happen successively to be united to that organized living body. And whatever is talked of other definitions, ingenious observation puts it past doubt that the idea in our minds, of which the sound human in our mouths is the sign, is nothing else but of an animal of a certain form. So he's trying to say what it is to be human is to be a special kind of animal. It's not to be, rational, reflective, the way other philosophers have talked about. Since I think I may be confident that whoever should see a creature of his own shape or make, though it had no more reason all its life than a cat or parrot, would still call that a human. And whosoever should hear a cat or parrot discourse, reason, and philosophize, would call or think it nothing but a cat or a parrot, and say the one was a dull, irrational human, and the other a very intelligent, rational parrot. So it's like, look, what it is to be the same human isn't to be capable of ongoing forms of reflection and rationality. A relation we have in an author of great note is sufficient to countenance the supposition of a rational parrot. So he has to now convince the reader that there is such a thing as a rational parrot. His words are, and there's now a very long story that I'm going to skip, in which somebody heard from Prince Maurice's own mouth a story of a parrot that Prince Maurice himself had met while in Brazil that was in fact capable of carrying on a conversation. And so he wants to, and then this prince also had a Dutchman that spoke Brazilian and a Brazilian that spoke Dutch, because they had to translate, because the prince spoke Dutch and the parrot spoke Brazilian. And they all agreed about what the parrot was saying, even these two people who were separately doing the translation. Anyway, so he's just convinced you, no, really, there's such a thing as a talking parrot, and I have good evidence for it. All right, so still a subsection in number 8, same man. I have taken care that the reader should have the story at large in the author's own words, because he seems to me not to have thought it incredible. So we have someone who thinks, oh, this is a plausible story. For it cannot be imagined that so able a man as he, who had sufficiency enough to warrant all the testimonies he gives of himself, should take so much pains in a place where it had nothing to do, to pin so close not only on a man whom he mentions as his friend, but on a prince in whom he acknowledges very great honesty and piety, a story which, if he himself thought incredible, he could not also but think ridiculous. It is the prince, it is plain, who vouches this story, and our author who relates it from him, both of them call this talker a parrot. And I ask anyone else who thinks such a story fit to be told, whether, if this parrot and all of its kind had always talked, as we have the prince's word for it, this one did, whether, I say, they would not have passed for a race of rational animals. But yet, whether for all that, they would have been allowed to be humans and not parrots. For I presume it is not the idea of a thinking or rational being alone that makes the idea of a human in most people's sense, but of a body so and so shaped, joined to it. And if that be the idea of a human, the same successive body, not shifted all at once, must, as well as the same immaterial spirit, go to the making of the same human. All right, and now we get to section 9, personal identity. This being premised, to find wherein personal identity consists, we must consider what person stands for, which I think is a thinking, intelligent being that has reason and reflection and can consider itself as itself the same thinking thing in different times and places, which it does only by that consciousness which is inseparable from thinking, and, as it seems to me, essential to it, so essential to thinking, it being impossible for anyone to perceive without perceiving that he does perceive. When we see, hear, smell, taste, feel, meditate, or will anything, we know that we do so. Thus it is always as to our present sensations and perceptions. And by this everyone is to themselves that which they call themselves. It is not being considered in this case whether the same self be continued in the same or diverse substances. So it is by your thinking that you know that you are the same thinker, not because you have some other kind of immaterial soul substance that assures you that you are the same thinker. 4, since consciousness always accompanies thinking, and it is that which makes everyone to be what they call their self, and thereby distinguishes themselves from all other thinking things. In this alone consists personal identity. In other words, the sameness of a rational being. And as far as this consciousness can be extended backward to any past action or thought, so far reaches the identity of that person. It is the same self now it was then, and it is by the same self with this present one that now reflects on it that action was done. Section 10. Consciousness makes personal identity. But it is further inquired whether it be the same identical substance. This few would think they had a reason to doubt of if these perceptions, with their consciousness, always remained present in the mind, whereby the same thinking thing would be always consciously present, and, as would be thought, evidently the same to itself. But that which seems to make the difficulty is this, that this consciousness being interrupted always by forgetfulness, there being no moment of our lives wherein we have the whole train of all our past actions before our eyes in one view, but even the best memories losing the sight of one part while they are viewing another. And we sometimes, and that being the greatest parts of our lives, not reflecting on our past selves, being intent on our present thoughts, and in sound sleep, having no thoughts at all, or at least none that with that consciousness which remarks our waking thoughts. So you would never doubt that you were the same person over time if you could always keep all of it in mind all together, and you never fell asleep and had any disruptions in your consciousness. I say in all these cases, our consciousness being interrupted and we losing the sight of our past selves, doubts are raised whether we are the same thinking thing, in other words, the same substance or no, which, however reasonable or unreasonable, concerns not personal identity at all. The question being, what makes the same person, and not whether it be the same identical substance, which always thinks in the same person. They thought thinking was done by some sort of thinking substance that was sort of united to your body. Different substances by the same consciousness, where they do partake in it, being united into one person, as well as different bodies by the same life, are united into one animal, whose identity is preserved in that change of substances by the unity of one continued life. For it being the same consciousness that makes a person be themselves to themselves, personal identity depends on that only, whether it be annexed solely to one individual substance or can be continued in a succession of several substances. For as far as any intelligent being can repeat the idea of any past action with the same consciousness it had of it at first, and with the same consciousness it has of any present action, so far it is the same personal self. For it is by the consciousness it has of its present thoughts and actions that it is self to itself now, and so will be the same self as far as the same consciousness can extend to actions past or to come, and would be, by distance of time or change of substance, no more two persons than a man be two men by wearing other clothes today than he did today, with a long or a short sleep between. The same consciousness uniting those distant actions into the same persons, whatever substances contributed to their production. Section 11, personal identity and change of substance. That this is so, we have some kind of evidence in our very bodies, all whose particles, while vitally united to the same thinking conscious self, so that we feel when we are touched and are affected by and conscious of good or harm that happens to them, are a part of ourselves, in other words, of our thinking conscious self. Thus, the limbs of someone's body are to every one a part of themselves. We sympathize with and are concerned for them. So you're concerned about your own hand in a different way than you're concerned about someone else's. Cut off a hand and thereby separate it from that consciousness he had of its heat, cold, and other affections. And it is then no longer a part of that which is himself, any more than the remotest part of matter. Thus, we see the substance whereof personal self consisted at one time may be varied at another. So you can continue to be the same person even if you lose a hand, and there's less of you to feel than there was before. There being no question about the same person, though the limbs which but now were a part of it be cut off. All right, that concludes section 11. Now section 12. But the question is, whether if the same substance which thinks be changed, so if your thinking substance moves, it can be the same person, or remaining the same, it can be different persons. Could you have different persons with the same thinking substance, or the same person with different thinking substances? whether in the change of thinking substances. And to this I answer, first, this can be no question at all to those who place thought in a purely material animal constitution, void of an immaterial substance. So if you're a materialist, this is not a problem for you. 4, whether their supposition be true or no, it is plain they conceive personal identity preserved in something else than identity of substance, as animal identity is preserved in identity of life and not of substance. And therefore, those who place thinking in an immaterial substance only, before they can come to deal with these, the previous philosophers, must show why personal identity cannot be preserved in the change of immaterial substances or a variety of particular immaterial substances, as well as animal identity is preserved in the change of material substances or a variety of particular bodies. Unless they will say it is one immaterial spirit that makes the same life in brutes, it is as one immaterial spirit that makes the same person in men, which the Cartesians at least will not admit, for fear of making brutes thinking things too. So that they didn't want animals to think the Cartesians did. They wanted them to be more like machines. And this is just a challenge where he's like, if you can have personal identity and think that all of the features of thinking occur in your physical aspect, then the people who say, no, it happens in your thinking parts are still on the hook for why your personal identity should go with the thinking parts and not just stay with the parts that have already been solved by the other side of this debate. All right, 13. But next, as to the first part of the question, whether if the same thinking substance, supposing immaterial substances only to think, be changed, it can be the same person. I answer that it cannot be resolved, but by those who know what kind of substances they are that do think, and whether the consciousness of past actions can be transferred from one thinking substance to another. So could you take the print from this wax and put it on the other wax? I grant, were the same consciousness the same individual action, it could not. But it being a present representation of a past action, why it may not be possible that that may be represented to the mind to have been, which never really was, will remain to be shown. So you might think it was your action because all you have is a representation of it, even though it wasn't actually your action. And therefore, how far the consciousness of past actions is annexed to any individual agent, so that another cannot possibly have it, will be hard for us to determine till we know what kind of action it is that cannot be done without a reflex act of perception accompanying it, and how performed by thinking substances who cannot think without being conscious of it. But that which we call the same consciousness, not being the same individual act, why one intellectual substance may not have represented to it, as done by itself, what it never did, and was perhaps done by some other agent. Why, I say, such a representation may not possibly be without reality of material or of matter of fact, as well as several representations in dreams are, which yet whilst dreaming we take for true, will be difficult to conclude from the nature of things. He's like, look, we can't be sure that it was us that were doing it and not a dream that we had of some kind or another. And that it never is so, will by us, till we have clearer views of the nature of thinking substances, be best resolved into the goodness of God, who, as far as the happiness or misery of any of the sensible creatures is concerned in it, will not, by a fatal error of theirs, transfer from one to another that consciousness which draws reward or punishment with it. So he's like, look, we just have to assume that when we remember having done an action, it's not because we accidentally got the wrong thinking substance attached to our body. Like, thank you, God's probably not going to do that. How far this may be an argument against those who would place thinking in a system of fleeting animal spirits, I leave to be considered. But yet, to return to the question before us, it must be allowed that if the same consciousness, which, as has been shown, is quite a different thing from the same numerical figure or motion in body, can be transferred from one thinking substance to another, it will be possible that two thinking substances may make but one person. For the same consciousness being preserved, whether in the same or different substances, the personal identity is preserved. All right, so he's still using consciousness to track it across different substances. As to the second part of it, this is now section 14. As to the second part of the question, whether the same immaterial substance remaining, there may be two distinct persons, which question seems to me to be built on this: whether the same immaterial being conscious of the action of its past duration, may be wholly stripped of all the consciousness of its past existence, and lose it beyond the power of ever retrieving it again. And so, as it were, beginning a new account from a new period, have a consciousness that cannot reach beyond this new state. So, all those who hold pre-existence, and remember again the reading from the Phaedo by Plato, are evidently of this mind, since they allow the soul to have no remaining consciousness of what it did in that pre-existent state, either wholly separate from body or informing any other body. So you don't remember what happened before you were born, and you don't remember what happened in some other life before your soul was made available for the transmigration. All right. And if they should not, it is plain experience would be against them. So that personal identity, reaching no further than consciousness reaches, a pre-existent spirit, not having continued so many ages in a state of silence, must needs make different persons. Suppose a Christian Platonist or a Pythagorean should, upon God's having ended all his works of creation the seventh day, think his soul hath existed ever since. This was a view that was out there. And would imagine it has revolved in several human bodies, as I once met with one who was persuaded his had been the soul of Socrates. How reasonably I will not dispute. This I know, that in the post he filled, which was no very inconsiderable one, he passed for a very rational man, and the press has shown that he wanted not parts or learning. Would anyone say that he, not being conscious of any of Socrates' actions or thoughts, could be the same person with Socrates? Let anyone reflect upon himself and conclude that they have in themselves an immaterial spirit, which is that which thinks in them, and, in the constant change of their body, keeps them the same, and is that which they call themselves. Let them also suppose to be the very same soul that was in Nestor or Thucydides at the siege of Troy, for souls being, as far as we know anything of them, in their nature indifferent to any a particular parcel of matter. The supposition has no apparent absurdity to it, which it may have been, and as well as it is now the soul of any other person. But that person now having no consciousness of any of the actions, either of Nestor or Thucydides, does or can they conceive themselves the same person with either of them? Can they be concerned in any of those actions, attribute those actions to themselves, or think them their own more than the actions of any other humans that have ever existed? So that this consciousness not reaching to any of the actions of either of those men, they are no more one self with either of them than if the soul or immaterial spirit that now informs them had been created and began to exist when it began to inform his present body. Though it were ever so true that the same spirit that informed Nestor's or Thucydides' body were numerically the same as the one that now informs his. Really, you don't get anything out of it if you happen to, even if it were true that you had the same soul. For this would no more make them the same person with Nestor than if some of the particles of matter that were once a part of Nestor were now part of this person. The same immaterial substance without the same consciousness, no more making the same person by being united to any one body than the same particle of matter without consciousness united to any body makes the same person. So maybe some of the water in your body was also in their body, still doesn't make you the same person, drawing the analogy to the soul. But let them once find themselves conscious of any of the actions of Nestor, they then find themselves the same person with Nestor. Section 5. And thus we may be able, without any difficulty, to conceive the same person at the resurrection. So at the Christian resurrection at the end of time when people come back from the dead. Though in a body not exactly in make or parts the same which he had here, the same consciousness going along with the soul that inhabits it. But yet the soul alone in the change of bodies would scarce to anyone but him that makes the soul, the man, be enough to make the same man. So the soul alone is not enough. It's the soul of that man, and you need that man to also be there. Quote, for should the soul of a prince, carrying with it the consciousness of the prince's past life, enter and inform the body of a cobbler, as soon as deserted by his own soul, everyone sees he would be the same person with the prince, end quote, accountable only for the prince's actions. But who would say it was the same human? So even if the soul of the prince went into the cobbler with the memories, then you would say that this person is accountable for whatever actions the prince had committed, but they're still not the same human. They're a different human. The body too goes to the making of the man, and would, I guess, to everybody determine the man in this case, so cobbler versus prince, wherein the soul, with all its princely thoughts about it, would not make another man, but he would be the same cobbler to everyone besides himself. No one would really believe it. I know that, in the ordinary way of speaking, the same person and the same man stand for one and the same thing. And here's where it's important to remember that man here means human. And indeed, everyone will always have a liberty to speak as they please and to apply whatever articulate sounds to whatever ideas they think fit and change them as often as they please. But yet, when we inquire what makes the same spirit, human, or person, we must fix the ideas of spirit, human, or person in our minds. And having resolved with ourselves what we mean by them, it will not be hard to determine in either of them or the like whether it is the same and when not. Section 16. Consciousness makes the same person. But though the same immaterial substance or soul does not alone, wherever it be, and in whatsoever state, make the same person, or excuse me, the same human, yet it is plain consciousness, as far as ever it can be extended, be it to ages past, unites existences and actions, very remote in time, into the same person. So no matter how far away in places and times they are, it can be the same person who did it, as well as does the existences and actions of the immediately preceding moment. So that whatever has the consciousness of present and past actions is the same person to whom they both belong. Had I the same consciousness that I saw the ark and Noah's flood as that I saw an overflowing of the Thames last winter, or as that I write now, like write that I am writing right now, I could no more doubt that I who write this now, that saw the Thames overflowed last winter, and that viewed the flood at the general deluge, was the same self. Place that self in whatever substance you please, then that I who write this am the same myself now whilst I write, whether I consist of all the same substance, material or immaterial, or no, that I was yesterday. For as to this point of being the same self, it matters not whether this present self be made up of the same or other substances. I being as much concerned and as justly accountable for any action that was done 1,000 years since, appropriated to me now by the self-consciousness, as I am for what I did in the last moment. So he really is making an analogy with the soul substance and the thinking substance and the material substance. Even if you have different water particles in your body today than you did yesterday, the same consciousness and awareness of your past actions is what unites you as the same person. And the same holds for those other substances that are not material substances as well. Section 17, self depends on consciousness. Self is that conscious thinking thing, whatever substance made up of, whether spiritual or material, simple or compounded, it matters not, which is sensible or conscious of pleasure and pain, capable of happiness or misery, and so is concerned for itself as far as that consciousness extends. Thus, everyone finds that, whilst comprehended under that consciousness, the little finger is as much a part of himself as what is most so. Upon separation of this little finger, should this consciousness go along with the little finger and leave the rest of the body, it is evident the little finger would be the person, the same person, and self then would have nothing to do with the rest of the body. So we do think that if you cut your finger off, that the consciousness stays here and the finger goes over there with no more consciousness. But it's like, oh, what if it went along with the finger? That's now the same person, and it left this body right here to go with it. We would say whichever is the person is the one that has the consciousness. All right. As in this case, it is the consciousness that goes along with the substance when one part is separate from another, which makes the same person. And by one part, like when things are chopped off your body, which used to happen more often, and constitutes this inseparable self. So it is in reference to substances remote in time. That with which the consciousness of this present thinking thing can join itself makes the same person and is one self with it, and with nothing else. So you can't give your consciousness to certain kinds of machines, but you can eat some food and now it becomes part of you and your consciousness is now joined to it. And so it attributes to itself and owns all the actions of that thing as its own, as far as that consciousness reaches and no farther, as everyone who reflects will perceive. Section 18, objects of reward and punishment. In this, personal identity is founded all the right and justice of reward and punishment. So right and wrong, justice, reward, punishment go along with this notion of personal identity. Happiness and misery being that for which everyone is concerned for themselves, and not mattering what becomes of any substance not joined to or affected with that consciousness. For, as it is evident in the instance I gave but now, if the consciousness went along with the little finger when it was cut off, that would be the same self which was concerned for the whole body yesterday, as making part of itself, whose actions then it cannot but admit as its own now. So even if it's with the little finger and it goes marching off alone, still it's the same person that was worried about all of the body yesterday, even though it no longer has that whole body to worry about. Though if the same body should still live, and immediately from the separation of the little finger have its own peculiar consciousness, whereof the little finger knew nothing, it would not at all be concerned for it as a part of itself, or could own any of its actions, or have any of them imputed to him. So if you cut off the little finger and the body is here, and the little finger takes the consciousness, but now there's like this new weird consciousness that comes in the new body, that new body can't be responsible for any things that the little finger goes off and does. If the little finger goes off and like pulls the fire alarm, that is not the consciousness in the new body or in the body, the new consciousness in the body's fault. It is the finger's fault, different consciousness, because they have different starts, different beginnings. Section 19. This may show us wherein personal identity consists, not in the identity of substance, but, as I have said, in the identity of consciousness. Wherein, if Socrates and the present mayor of Queenborough agree, they are the same person. If the same Socrates waking and sleeping do not partake of the same consciousness, Socrates waking and sleeping is not the same person. Same human, but not the same person. And to punish Socrates waking for what sleeping Socrates thought, and waking Socrates was never conscious of, and would be no more of right than to punish one twin for what his brother twin did, whereof he knew nothing, because their outsides were so like that they could not be distinguished, for such twins have been seen. I do like that what he has to remind you of is, no, really, they're twins that are so similar that this can happen. Section 20. But yet possibly it will still be objected. Suppose I wholly lose the memory of some parts of my life, beyond a possibility of retrieving them, so that perhaps I shall never be conscious of them again. Yet, am I not the same person who did those actions, had those thoughts that I once was conscious of, though I have now forgot them? To which I answer that we must here take notice what the word I is applied to, which in this case is the human only. So you're definitely the same human who did that, but not the same person. And the same human being presumed to be the same person, I is easily here supposed to stand also for the same person. But if it be possible for the same human to have distinct, incommunicable consciousnesses at different times, it is passed out. The same human would at different times make different persons, which we see is the sense of mankind in the solemnest declarations of their opinions. Human laws not punishing the mad man for the sober man's actions. So if somebody sort of loses their reason and their sense, then you don't punish the new person for things that the previous person did. Nor the sober man for what the madman did, thereby making them two persons, which is somewhat explained by our way of speaking in English, when we say such a one is not himself, or is beside himself, in which phrases it is insinuated as if those who now, or at least first used them, thought that self was changed. The self-same person was no longer in the same human. 21. Difference between identity of human and person. But yet it is hard to conceive that Socrates, the same individual man, should be two persons. To help us a little in this, we must consider what is meant by Socrates, or the same individual man. First, it must be either the same individual, immaterial thinking substance, in short, the same numerical soul and nothing else. Second, this is the second option, or the same animal without any regard to an immaterial soul, so that's the same human. Thirdly, or the same immaterial spirit united to the same animal. Now, take which of these suppositions you please, it is impossible to make personal identity to consist in anything but consciousness, or reach any further than that does. For by the first of them, the same individual immaterial thinking substance, it must be allowed possible that a person born with different parents and in different times may be the same person, or excuse me, the same human. A way of speaking which whoever admits must allow it possible for the same human to be two distinct persons as any two that have lived in different ages without the knowledge of one another's thoughts. So like, if you let that happen, really anybody could be anybody else, trivially. By the second and third, Socrates, in this life and after it, cannot be the same man anyway, but by the same consciousness. And so, making human identity to consist in the same thing, wherein we place personal identity, there will be no difficulty to allow the same man to be the same person. But then they who place human identity in consciousness only, and not in something else, must consider how they will make the infant Socrates the same man with Socrates after the resurrection. But whatsoever to some men makes a human, and consequently the same individual human, wherein perhaps fewer agreed, personal identity can by us be placed in nothing but consciousness, which is that alone which makes what we call self, without involving us in great absurdities. Section 22. But is not a person drunk and sober the same person? Why else are they punished for the facts they commit when drunk, though they never be conscious of it afterwards? Just as much the same person, just as much the same person as a man that walks and does other things in his sleep is the same person, and is answerable for any mischief he shall do in his sleep. Human laws punish both with a justice suitable to their way of knowledge, because in these cases they cannot distinguish what is real, what counterfeit, and so the ignorance in drunkenness or sleep is not admitted as a plea. So because you can't verify that they really are ignorant of it, then you should err on the safe side as a human law. For though punishment be annexed to personality, and personality to consciousness, and the drunkard perhaps be not conscious of what he did, yet human judicatures justly punish him, because the fact is proved against him, so what he did. But want of consciousness cannot be proved for him. But in the great day wherein the secrets of all hearts shall be laid open, it may be reasonable to think no one shall be made to answer for that of which he knows nothing, but shall receive his doom, his conscience accusing or excusing him. So it's like God will figure it all out in the end. Section 23. Consciousness alone makes self. Nothing but consciousness can unite remote existences into the same person. The identity of substance will not do it. For whatever substance there is, however framed, without consciousness, there is no person. And a carcass may be a person, as well as any sort of substance be so, without consciousness. So you need the consciousness if you want to have a person. Suppose, could we suppose two distinct, incommunicable consciousnesses acting in the same body, the one constantly by day, the other by night? And on the other side, the same consciousness acting by intervals in two distinct bodies. I ask, in the first case, whether the day and the night man would not be two as distinct persons as Socrates and Plato, and whether in the second there would not be one person in two distinct bodies as much as the one man is the same in two distinct clothings. So if your consciousness got transferred to another body, he's like, nope, you're still the same person. It's just like new clothes. Doesn't change. Nor is it at all material to say that this same and this distinct consciousness, in the cases above mentioned, is owing to the same and distinct immaterial substances, bringing it with them to these bodies, which, whether true or no, alters not the case. Can't tell if they did or not. Since it is evident the personal identity would equally be determined by the consciousness, whether that consciousness were annexed to some individual material substance or not. Even if you have those substances, he says, you're still using consciousness as the marker. For, granting that the thinking substance in humans must be necessarily supposed immaterial, it is evident that immaterial thinking thing may sometimes part with its past consciousness and be restored to it again, as appears in the forgetfulness people often have of their past actions. And the mind many times recovers the memory of a past consciousness, which it had lost for 20 years altogether. Make these intervals of memory and forgetfulness to take their turns regularly by day and night, and you have two persons with the same immaterial spirit, as much as in the former instance, two persons with the same body. So that self is not determined by identity or diversity of substance, which it cannot be sure of, but only by identity of consciousness. Section 24. Indeed, it may conceive the substance whereof it is now made up to have existed formerly, united in the same conscious being. But consciousness removed, that substance is no more itself and makes no more a part of it than any other substance, as is evident in the instance we have given already of a limb cut off, of whose heat or cold or other affections, having no longer any consciousness, it is no more of a person's self than of any other matter in the universe. In like manner, it will be in reference to any immaterial substance. So he's like, look, once your hand is cut off, if it's cold, then it's not your hand feeling cold. Like you don't feel it because it's no longer part of your consciousness. It could be cold, but it's over there being cold, separate from you. Similarly, if there's the substance that's cut off, who cares? Because now it's just like the hand, except immaterial. That's the only difference. All right, in like manner, it will be in reference to any immaterial substance, which is void of that consciousness whereby I am myself to myself. If there be any part of its existence which I cannot, upon recollection, join with that present consciousness, whereby I am now myself, it is in that part of its existence no more myself than any other immaterial being. For whatsoever any substance has thought or done, which I cannot recollect, and by my consciousness make my own thought and action, it will no more belong to me, whether a part of me thought or did it, than if it had been thought or done by any other immaterial being anywhere existing. Section 25. I agree, the more probable opinion is that this consciousness is annexed to and the affectation of one individual immaterial substance. But let people, according to their diverse hypotheses, resolve of that as they please. So here he's saying, it's more probable, but really we don't have to answer this question. This very intelligent being, sensible of happiness or misery, must grant that there is something that is themselves that they are concerned for and would have happy, and that the self has existed in a continued duration more than one instant, and therefore it is possible may exist, as it has done, months and years to come, without any certain bounds to be set to its duration, and may be the same self by the same consciousness continued on for the future. And thus by this consciousness, he finds himself to be the same self which did such and such an action some years ago, by which he comes to be happy or miserable now. In all which account of self, the same numerical substance is not considered as making the same self, but the same continued consciousness, in which several substances may have been united and again separated from it, which, whilst they continued in a vital union with that wherein this consciousness then resided, made a part of the same self. Thus, any part of our bodies vitally united to that which is conscious in us makes a part of ourselves. But upon separation from the vital union by that consciousness, by which that consciousness is communicated, that which a moment since was a part of ourselves is now no more so than a part of another person's self as a part of me. And it is not impossible, but in a little time may become a real part of some other person. Yeah. So like if somebody decided to eat your hand, it was part of you and now it's a part of someone else united to them vitally. All right. And so we have the same numerical substance become a part of two different persons, and the same person preserved under the change of various substances. Could we suppose any spirit wholly stripped of all its memory or consciousness of past actions, as we find our minds always are of a great part of ours, and sometimes of them all? The union or separation of such spiritual substance would make no variation of personal identity, and more than that of any particle of matter does. Any substance vitally united to the present thinking being is a part of that very same self which now is. Anything united to it by a consciousness of former actions also makes a part of the same self, which is the same both then and now. So there's something that unifies, that unites the physical particles of your body into the continued vital organization, and that makes particles a part of your body as a living organism. And whatever the immaterial substances are also have to be vitally united and be part of the continuous organization, even though they're immaterial. And if they're separated, then they're no longer part of you. 26. Person is a forensic term. Person, as I take it, is the name for this self. Wherever a person finds what they call themselves, there, I think, may another say is the same person. It is a forensic term, appropriating actions and their merit, and so belongs only to intelligent agents capable of a law and happiness and misery. This personality extends itself beyond present existence to what is past, only by consciousness, whereby it becomes concerned and accountable, owns and imputes to itself past actions, just upon the same ground and for the same reason that it does the present. All which is founded in a concern for happiness, the unavoidable concomitant of consciousness, that which is conscious of pleasure and pain, desiring that self that is conscious should be happy. And therefore, whatever past actions it cannot reconcile or appropriate to the present self by consciousness, it can be no more concerned in than if they had never been done. And to receive pleasure or pain, i.e., reward or punishment, on the account of any such action, is all one as to be made happy or miserable in its first being, without any demerit at all. For supposing a person punished now for what they had done in another life, whereof they could be made to have no consciousness at all, what difference is there between that punishment and being created miserable? So if you don't have any memory of it at all, but you're being punished for it, he's saying really it's not punishment, you're just kind of torturing somebody. Yeah. And therefore, conformable to this, the apostle tells us that at the great day when everyone shall receive according to his doings, the secrets of all hearts shall be laid open. The sentence shall be justified by the consciousness all persons shall have, that they themselves, in what bodies soever they appear, or what substances soever that consciousness adheres to, are the same that committed those actions and deserve that punishment for them. 27. I am apt enough to think I have, in treating of this subject, made some suppositions that will look strange to some readers, and possibly they are so in themselves. But yet, I think they are such as are pardonable in this ignorance we are in of the nature of that thinking thing that is in us, and which we look on as ourselves, because we don't actually know what's going on when we're conscious of things. We don't know what it is to be united vitally, such that it's part of consciousness. Did we know what it was, or how it was tied to a certain system of fleeting animal spirits, or whether it could or could not perform its operations of thinking and memory out of a body organized as ours is, and whether it has pleased God that no one such spirit shall ever be united to anyone but such body, upon the right constitution of whose organs its memory should depend, we might see the absurdity of some of these suppositions I have made. But taking as we ordinarily do now, in the dark concerning these matters, the soul of a man for an immaterial substance, independent from matter and indifferent alike to it all, there can, from the nature of things, be no absurdity at all, to suppose that the same soul may at different times be united to different bodies, and with them make up for that time one man, as well as we suppose a part of the sheep's body yesterday should be a part of a man's body tomorrow, and in that union make a vital part of Meliboeus himself, as well it did as of Israel. All right, so yesterday it was the sheep, and then you eat it, and now it's part of your body. Maybe the same thing happens with the soul. 28. The difficulty from ill use of names. To conclude, whatever substance begins to exist, it must, during its existence, necessarily be the same. Whatever compositions of substances begin to exist, during the union of those substances, the concrete must be the same. Whatsoever mode begins to exist, during its existence, it is the same. And so if the composition be of distinct substances and distinct modes, the same rule holds, whereby it will appear that the difficulty or obscurity that has been about this matter rather rises from the names ill used than from any obscurity in the things themselves. For whatever makes the specific idea to which the name is applied, if that idea is steadily kept to, so if you're not sort of like sneakily switching the topic, the distinction of anything into the same and diverse will easily be conceived, and there can arise no doubt about it. Section 29. Continued existence makes identity. For, supposing a rational spirit be the idea of a man, it is easy to know what is the same man, viz. The same spirit, whether separate or in a body, will be the same man. Supposing a rational spirit vitally united to a body of a certain conformation of parts to make a man, whilst that rational spirit, with that fleeting conformation of parts, though continuing in a fleeting successive body, remain, it will be the same man. But if to anyone the idea of the man be but the vital union of parts in a certain shape, as long as that vital union and shape remain in a concrete, no otherwise the same, but by a continued succession of fleeting particles, it will be the same man. So even if you conceive of identity to just be, for whatever be the composition whereof the complex idea is made, whenever existence makes it one particular thing under any denomination, the same existence continues, preserves it the same individual under the same denomination. All right, that is the end of the chapter.